Welcome to The Workplace, a podcast by CalChamber. I'm Bianca Saad, General Counsel for Labor and Employment with the California Chamber of Commerce. Hello, listeners. It's been a busy summer for businesses in California, and one of the big things that has been keeping employers busy has been preparing for and implementing California's new workplace violence prevention requirements. As a reminder, these requirements stem from last year's SB 553 and took effect on July 1st, 2024. The law requires covered employers to create, maintain, and implement a workplace violence prevention plan, train on that plan, and maintain various records, among other things. And although the deadline for implementing the plan and rolling out the training has come and gone, there may be some employers out there still working to cross their T's and dot their I's as they get everything pushed out. Another thing to note about this law, it isn't just a one-time exercise for employers. The Workplace Violence Prevention Plan must be updated and employees must be trained on an annual basis, and that's not including any additional training that may be required due to changes in the plan. To walk us through some of the common questions, practical challenges, and lessons that employers have encountered as they implement their workplace violence prevention programs, we are lucky to have two special guests with us today. First, we welcome back CalChamber's Senior Employment Law Counsel, Erika Barbara. Thanks for being here, Erika.
Hi, Bianca. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
And next, I'm very excited to welcome CalChamber's very own Vice President of Human Resources, Hilda Watson. Thanks so much for joining us, Hilda.
Thank you, Bianca. I'm really excited to join you both on today's podcast.
Yes, this is a very important topic, one that continues to stump our members. So, Erika, let's go ahead and start with you. You're regularly on our labor law helpline, and you've been fielding calls on the new workplace violence prevention requirements over the last few months. Now, we saw an increase in the calls as the July 1 deadline approached, but some members continue to reach out with questions about compliance. So what are some of the common questions that we've been hearing from helpline members on this issue?
Sure. So this law has definitely been a hot topic for us over on the helpline. One of the most common questions that we've received is, does this law apply to my business? So as a refresher, this law applies to all employers in the state of California with very limited exceptions. And so it does not apply to healthcare workers covered by CalOSHA's Workplace Violence Prevention in Healthcare Standard, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, law enforcement agencies, certain remote employees, and places of employment with fewer than 10 employees that are not open to the public. And it's those last two exemptions that really garner the most questions, so let's dig into those for a moment. So starting with the exemption for remote employees, if an employer has employees in California that work remotely from a location that is outside of their control, such as from the employee's own home, then the employer is not subject to this law. However, if those employees work a hybrid schedule and also report to a work site, then the exemption doesn't apply and the employer would need to have a workplace violence prevention plan for their work site. And the other exemption that raises questions is the less than 10 employees exemption. Now that applies to only those places of employment that have fewer than 10 employees working at the work site at any given time and that are not accessible to the public. So there are two parts to this exemption, which sometimes people get tripped up on. It's not enough that the company has less than 10 employees. The work site also needs to not be accessible to the public. And there's some gray area around this exemption because the law doesn't actually define what it means to be not accessible to the public. And unfortunately, we don't yet have any guidance from CalOSHA on what that term means. So unless and until we get some more guidance, if it's possible for the public to access an employer's work site, even if it may not be common for them to actually do that, the best practice would be to follow the requirements of the law, or if you're unsure, to consult legal counsel as to whether that exemption would apply.
Okay, that's great. So if an employer is not falling under any exemption, then we know that that employer needs to have a workplace violence prevention plan for their workplace. And so one thing I wanted to clarify for our listeners, does that mean that if an employer has multiple work sites or work locations, then they need to have multiple plans?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So then that brings us to you, Hilda. Now, you yourself have become very familiar with the requirements since you've been implementing the plan and other components here at CalChamber. And as Erika mentioned, one of those requirements is having that plan for each individual work site. So can you speak a bit about, what were some of the challenges that you had or any special considerations when creating that plan for multiple work sites, and especially in a case like ours where those work sites are pretty different from each other?
Yes, absolutely. First is the model plan. It will only get you so far. It's a great resource, but it still requires a great deal of evaluation of where you are and identifying hazards, necessary improvements, and more. It also is very important to remember that you need to have a different plan for each site because each site will have its own features and challenges related to the potential for workplace violence. So for example, here at CalChamber, we're located in a high rise. Our main office is in a high rise building on multiple floors. And so there's definitely considerations that we had to evaluate, hazards we had to look at compared to our warehouse, which is a single story building. There are other tenants there, but all in all, it's its own space. But entry points are different. Security is different there. The parking structure is different. The whole setup is different than our high-rise building where the majority of our employees are. So taking that into consideration, that right there, shows you that you have to have two different plans. You have to really assess each location differently as doors, entry points can be, in different areas, as well as, again, security and things of that nature, cameras and things like that. So you definitely have to evaluate individually each site location because not one location is built exactly the same.
All right. And then another question for you, Hilda. Any lessons that you learned along the way or words of advice that you could give to other HR professionals out there when looking to create multiple plans for those multiple work sites?
Yeah, one of the things I really would encourage people to do is, although the law requires you to have your staff involved and make it interactive and engaging, this is something you really, really should do. The HR person who's responsible possibly for this plan or the office administrator, whomever is deemed responsible, the plan administrator for this should not be the sole person. I think it's really important that everyone gets involved. There's different perspectives, different views from employees, managers that, not one person can really evaluate on their own. So, one thing I would encourage is maybe form a team or a committee and have regular meetings to go over, the identifying points of the plan, the assessments, the hazards, and things of that nature. And this is why I think the Workplace Violence Toolkit that CalChamber provides to its members and customers is such a great resource because it's all laid out. There's a checklist and steps for the plan administrator to follow to ensure these things are not missed.
Yeah, I love that point about getting employees involved. I think that's a really critical piece, and especially too, again, if you've got those multiple work sites. So back to you, Erika. I'm guessing some of what Hilda shared may sound similar to other questions and challenges you've heard from our helpline members about the plan. Now, when it comes to the substance of the plan, whether it be for one work site or multiple work sites, what sort of questions have you received?
Yeah, so we've received all sorts of questions about the substance of the plan, but one area that generates a lot of inquiry is the identification of hazards in the workplace and really how an employer should go about identifying what those hazards are. Members are often calling looking for guidance or resources on how to figure out what the potential hazards are that need to be addressed in their workplace violence prevention plan. So the first step really in answering this question is understanding what we mean when we talk about workplace violence hazards. So a workplace hazard is a condition in an employer's specific work site that has a risk factor for one or more of the 4 types of workplace violence that are defined by this law. And the 4 types of workplace violence are type 1 violence, which is violence that is committed by a person who has no legitimate business reason to be at the work site. Type 2 violence is violence that is directed at employees by third parties who come to the workplace, such as customers or clients or patients, etc. Type 3 violence is violence that is committed against an employee by another employee, supervisor, or manager, whether that's a current or former employee. And then we have type 4 violence, which is violence that is committed in the workplace by a third party who has some sort of a personal relationship with an employee. Now, there are two ways that employers can figure out what hazards may exist in their workplace. One is through their own inspections of the workplace, and two is through employee identification and reporting of potential hazards, which Hilda just touched on. So the first way that an employer is going to go about identifying those potential hazards is by conducting their own inspections. Now, the law requires employers to inspect the workplace to identify those potential hazards when they first implement their workplace violence prevention plan. But employers also have to conduct inspections after a workplace violence incident and anytime the employer is made aware of a new or previously unrecognized hazard. In terms of what a hazard may be, that's going to vary depending on a lot of different factors, such as the nature of the work site, where it's located, who has access to it, things like that. And then the second way that employers identify hazards is through their employees. So employers must involve employees in the process by including procedures in their plan that allow employees to report potential hazards and offer suggestions for mitigating those hazards. And this is an important step, not just because it's required by law, but also, as Hilda mentioned, because employees may be aware of hazards that are not on an employer's radar. So their input is really important to making sure that you've identified all of those potential hazards.
All right. Now, Hilda, you mentioned that the plan requires a great deal of customization specific to each individual worksite. And that includes that process of identifying hazards that Erika just described and you had touched on earlier. So when it came to the training, did you find that the training requirements also varied by the worksite?
Yes, the training requirements varied by site since the plans for each site were specific to their characteristics and various hazards. Now, I will say I did see some training offerings out there, but noticed that they were more so focused on general workplace violence information and not customizable to an employer-specific workplace violence plan. So when it came to creating the training, it was specific to each work site since each work site had its own plan. As Erika mentioned in her response, that getting everyone involved is super important. And, especially for type 4 violence, right? You may not even know that there's an employee that's having issues with somebody outside of the workplace, and that may be brought to your attention. So that is another reason why it's super important to get everyone involved in creating the plan and evaluating the hazards.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Erika, I know you'd gone through those various types of violence. And one thing that I think we're so used to because of how familiar we are is reminding folks, we should probably remind folks that the definition of workplace violence is very broad. Is that right?
That's true. Yes, it is.
So it would include not only the violent act that could happen, against an employee, but actually a threat of violence. And so I just wanted to flag that out there because I know we didn't highlight that definition front and center. And so going back to you, Erika, and the questions on the helpline that you've been receiving, I imagine you have received questions about training separately from the plan itself. So are there any questions that you have been seeing repeatedly around what type of training, how to meet this specific requirement under the law?
Sure. So yes, we do receive a lot of questions about training. We're often asked if there's a standard training that employers can use. And unfortunately, there is not, because there's no one-size-fits-all training in this area. And that's because the training is based on the employer's plan, which means that the training has to be customized to the specifics of the plan and the specifics of the employer's worksite, which is why HR professionals like Hilda, who are dealing with multiple work sites, will have to prepare variations of their training to account for the differences in those plans and the work sites. Now, our workplace violence prevention toolkit does include a model workplace violence prevention training slide deck that employers can use to prepare their training. The template slide deck helps employers identify what information needs to be customized. So it's a great starting point for employers to use to get that training prepared and pushed out to their employees if they haven't done that yet. But as we remind members on the helpline, it's so critical that the training is customized to the employer's specific plan and work site. And then another question that we often receive is about how the training must be provided to employees. Now, the law requires that the training include the opportunity for interactive questions and answers with a person who is knowledgeable about the employer's plan. So members will often ask whether that means the training has to be in person or whether it can be provided in some other format. Now, the best practice really is to provide the training live in person so that employees are able to ask questions and get answers during the training. However, if you are going to provide the training in some other manner, you have to ensure that employees have the ability to have their questions answered by somebody knowledgeable about the plan during that training.
Yes, that is an excellent reminder about that interactivity component that we have for the required training. And so before we close out, Hilda, I'll turn to you and ask, do you have any last remarks or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with fellow HR professionals when it comes to getting all their compliance ducks in a row for this law?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a time-consuming effort, so I definitely can relate to everyone out there who's listening and who's responsible for creating this. And so definitely give yourself plenty of time in advance each year to go through the plan, to create a strategy. If you're able to form a committee or a team, I highly recommend doing that, as you shouldn't go it alone. And if you haven't finished or started the plan, it's better late than never. So I encourage everybody to stick with it and to make this an ongoing process, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever works for your organization. So it's not so daunting each year, and just make this part of kind of your other training programs where you review it and you evaluate it on a regular basis. And as Erika mentioned, the Workplace Violence Toolkit, it's a great resource for employers and includes not only the model plan, but the training template for employers to customize and use when training their employees. So yeah, just stick with it and hang in there, everybody. It's definitely a time-consuming effort, but it's very important, and I think you will find that it will be very valuable to your employees as well.
Yeah, those are all great reminders. And I think if there's one thing that we can emphasize, it's not only that customization, but remembering that this wasn't just a one and done, folks. So if you are late to the game, just get caught up and also be ready for next year because we know it will be there again. We need to have that annual update. So Erika and Hilda, thank you both for sharing some of the common questions around this topic and for your tips and reminders for those employers who are still grappling with some of those requirements. And thank you again for taking the time to be here with me today.
Thanks, Bianca. It was a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Bianca.
And thank you, listeners, for joining this discussion on the workplace. Please share this episode and subscribe to future episodes of CalChamber's podcast by visiting calchamber.com.